What's up guys, Quagsire here today, and I'm gonna do a quick recap about my season in Cell. We went 4-0 as a lot of you guys saw. We had a differential of plus 17 in the regular season, and then in the playoffs we continued and we went 2-0 with a plus 11 differential. Here I have the kill count, and I updated it to include the playoffs even though the record and the differential and stuff doesn't include it. So I'm going to start to talk about how the season went and what the Pokemon did and what I thought about them, if I'd take them again in the future, all that stuff. So we got Kyurem Black for starters. That was our round 1 pick. And Kyurem wound up with 4 KOs and 2 deaths in 6 games. Actually, I'm mistaken. I forgot the passive death it got with Toxic in week 1. So it had 5 KOs, 2 deaths in 6 weeks. And of course, I won all 6 of those games. So it went 6-0 for win-loss. Kyurem Black, it didn't have that outstanding of a season, but it was kind of tricky because typically when I use an offensive Kyurem, it's a Pokemon I like to stash in the bag, so I didn't really put it in a position for it to flourish fully. We saw a lot of what it did came in the first week with its sub-toxic set, and that's because it came out early and it got to have an impact. For a first round pick, it didn't really have a first round impact, but it's not really due to some fault of its own. I thought it did have strong performance overall when it was needed. And always I'd say Kyurem's one of my favorite Pokemon to take in Tier 1 when I'm doing GBA tiers. I personally consider Kyurem in a league without any sort of unbans to be probably the top Tier 1. And that's because of how versatile it is. We saw it do sub-toxic, it can be Scarf, you can put a Z move on it, have it be a stall breaker, AV I used a few times. It's just a real versatile offensive weapon. It's kind of like a chess piece. You can use it in so many ways when you're dealing with your opponent's team. The next Pokemon I want to talk about is Buzzwole, and it had a heck of a season. It had 8 KOs and no deaths. It came to 5 games. Buzzwole was probably the biggest piece of our offense throughout the season. It had a real big game against Ben, landing that Stone Edge when we needed it. It did some things earlier, and of course, in the finals, it came through huge as the opponent just had no way to wall it. It was throwing off superpowers left and right, and its power was indeed super. To me, Buzzwole is really one of the premier Tier 2s. It has a great bulk on the physical side that allows it to come in on so many things, and that's not to be taken lightly, because so many of the Pokemon that can put on the offensive pressure Buzzwole can aren't really able to switch in on things the way it does. Now, it does have that 4 times weakness, so you have to be careful. I've got a little bit of a funny story that I'm not going to dive into fully, where I was running a sock with Substitute and Hidden Power Flying to bait out a Buzzwole. So that's, of course, a weakness to it, but if you can, you want to build around it a team that doesn't just allow people to put HP flying on a lot of things. You see I have Quagsire there, and one of the biggest reasons I took Quagsire is because it would make people start to think about Hidden Power Grass, and also have Kabutops in that function. You want to put Pokemon who kind of force the opponents to reconsider running the Hidden Power for things like Buzzwole and Scizor if you want to really make them work. So Buzzwole It has a nice bulk and it's one of the better scarfers with Beast Boost. It's a great late game cleaner. You can run roost sets, subsets. I really think this Pokemon doesn't belong in Tier 2. That's my opinion. I don't think it would be a great Tier 1. I just think it's a real good Tier 2 and it doesn't belong there. That's a Pokemon that I took early and I would take early again if it's Tier 2, of course. So our next pick was Pelipper, and Pelipper's an interesting one. I brought it to 3 games, it got 3 KOs, and of course it provided the rain for Kabutops in 2 of the games. Pelipper also, when I'm talking about the hidden powers, it of course encourages hidden power Electric, which supports Buzzwole, and that's one of the bigger reasons I took Pelipper. I took it in one of the later rounds. I don't think rain teams work in league format, but one of my favorite things to do is at Pelipper's in Tier 3, I like to have a small rain core, as you can see like I did with Pelipper and Kabutot. It just, for 2 Pokemon that aren't in the higher tiers, it really makes your opponents do a lot of prep and put a lot of thought into it. So they have a lot of value in that way. Pelipper, there's not too much to say about its performance. It did pretty decent. I definitely don't regret taking it. And we saw it had 2 survivals and 1 death, so +2 in the plus-minus ratio, pretty good for a T3. And the next one, here's one I have more to say about than Pelipper, and that's Umbreon. Umbreon came to 4 games, and it had 0 deaths. And as a T3, Umbreon really carried a heavy workload for our team. It basically combined with Slowbro and sometimes Zapdos did a lot for our defensive core. It took a big chunk of our whole defensive strategy. Umbreon's a Pokemon I think is very underrated. Of course, as I mentioned in a previous video, people tend to overlook it just because they say it can be setup fodder, but of course you want to be careful with that. But overall, the bulk it has is real good for the tier it's in. It can be a tremendous physical wall, tremendous special wall. You can try to run Curse with it. It's a good Pokemon, I think. And it really did a lot for us. It didn't get any KOs, but it took a lot of hits. It didn't get KO'd in any of the 5 games it came to. It just really found a way to make its mark in the team. The next mod we're going to talk about is Kabutops. And there's not too much to say. Kabutops came to 2 games. It got 2 KOs and 1 death. We had a pretty good moment with it, throwing off the Buginium Z and bopping that Celebi. A little bit of overkill on there. Kabutops, it got both of its KOs with a Z move. And it's a good tier 4. We didn't lean too heavily on it, but for a tier 4, it got 2 significant KOs. It beat the Clef, which allowed the Slowbro to sweep in that game. And it took a few chunks out of the Mudstale and knocked out the Celebi in what was our closest game of the season. Overall, no regrets there. Our next mon was Golurk, and unfortunately we didn't get to bring the Golurk. Golurk's a Pokemon I really like, and I just didn't find the use for it here. I've had seasons in leagues where I have made a lot of use out of it. This just wasn't one. I even had a league where it had 13 KOs and 1 MVP. That was a hell of a season. But yeah, we just couldn't find the purpose for it. And a lot of that's because Golurk, it's got 2 functions, Assault Vest or Rock Polish Sweeper. And for the Rock Polish Sweeper, we didn't really get that role for it because of Kabutops. Kabutops kinda did a similar thing. In hindsight, maybe it wasn't the best choice of a pick for us, considering we did have Kabutops, and we did have some more Tier 5 ground types, but Golurk to me is just real good value down there, so it's something I've always taken and always probably will take. The next mon is Slowbro Mega, and that was the MVP of this team. Slowbro came to all 6 games, got 10 KOs and led the team. It had 5 survivals and 1 death, which was, of course, in our closer game. In the finals, it came clutch, shutting down the Mega Charizard. I didn't need to give it any help dealing with Charizard. It took the thing down on its own, made it useless. And that was very clutch because, as you all know, Mega Charizard can be a very hard Pokemon to deal with. The tough claws and its incredible stab. It's really a force to be reckoned with. Slowbro, of course, had its biggest moment shining, though, in the semifinal game where it set up a trick room and just got 5 KOs. Slowbro really is a good Pokemon. I don't really think it belongs in Tier 2 for Megas. With shell armor, its Calm Minds can be very threatening in terms of just taking anything once it gets a few up and sweeping. And of course it has that high special attack and it can set up trick rooms as you saw, and with 394 special attack just deal out some significant hits. And it did that, and it took a lot of hits itself. Probably my favorite moment though with this Slowbro was when we had the Linoon belly drum in front of it and I just clicked foul play and watched it drop. That was real fun for me. Slowbro would have been able to take the hit, that's why I had the foul play on it. It's just so fat. We found ways to make it work in quite a few ways. We had the foul play, trick room on it. We had trick room 3 attacks, specially defensive, physically defensive, Calm Mind. It really has more versatility than people know, and it gets bonus points for looking like the Patrick Star ice cream cone from that episode. And our next mon is Zapdos. Zapdos was pretty fiercely medium in this season. It wasn't great, it wasn't bad. It went to 5 games, it got 3 KOs and 2 deaths. And it performed defensive functions. I tried to run it more offensively, I think once or twice, and it didn't really have that impact. But it did do a few things on defense. I think that the season wasn't terrible for it, but I think for the high standards that I hold Zapdos to, it was below what it's capable of. And I think part of that may have been me bringing in Celesteela, which is kind of similar. I didn't draft Celesteela, but when it was dropped, I mean, how can you resist a Celesteela like that? You can't. It's a round 1 draft pick. It should always be. So, Zappy, that's a Pokemon that I've had seasons in a league where it was my entire defensive core and it really held its own. And this just wasn't one of its best seasons. I know that there will be a time in the future where I get some redemption for it, but this wasn't its best. Next up, we have Celesteela, and we talked a little bit about it on the topic of Zapdos. I dropped Scolipede for it because it was dropped, and I'm just under the belief that Celesteela should never be a free agent. I had to grab it. It goes well with Pure and Black. And it did alright. It came to 3 games. It did pretty good in the one game where I brought it with specs, and I believe that would be against the Diamond Storms here. It did pretty good there. I think its 1 death was to a crit, if I recall correctly, so it probably should be at 3 KOs and no deaths, but that's fine. Still got a pretty convincing win there, so not the end of the world. He could have done a little bit more, but it didn't do bad. It was a good asset to have on the team. And at it again. Not that Scolipede was doing much either. And again, we come to Quagsire, who we didn't bring, just like Golurk. Only two mons we didn't find any purpose for, and that'd be Quagsire and the Golurk. Quagsire, I mostly got it just to impact prep. I could have done something with it for some sort of setup sweepers, but really I found myself okay dealing with them via Slowbro, particularly, and also a little bit of Umbreon. Quagsire, it didn't really have that much of a purpose with Slowbro there. One of the biggest reasons why I took it, as I mentioned earlier, was I wanted to get people to bring Hidden Power Grass to help Buzzwole, and Buzzwole definitely really shines, so I guess in that sort of sense it served its purpose, even though it didn't really do anything. You find that a lot with tier 5s. Generally, I try to look for ones that fill a very specific niche, because generally you're going to find they're not going to have too much of an impact. You can find ones with roles in certain niches, and if you can find one that can fill a certain niche, I'd always say go for it. Traditionally, they're never going to be a stalwart. There's going to be very specific times for them and very specific matchups. Otherwise, if you're finding one that you think is going to be able to do a little bit in every game, you're probably not going to get that result from it. You're probably going to be disappointed with it, and you're probably going to have better luck just bringing a different 6 Pokemon to that game. So for the last mon, we have Steelix, and Steelix came to one game, and it had 3 KOs and no deaths in that game. It was, of course, the MVP of that game. It put on a show, and it was a huge factor in me being able to win that game. And I believe that was this one against the Hotspurs. Could be mistaken. I'm pretty sure that was it, though. And yeah, I brought an Assault Vest one, and Nihilego kept inviting it back in, and he just had a hard time switching in on it with the Assault Vest coverage it had, and it wouldn't work. Not too much to say about it. I'd say one great game where it really makes that impacts worth it for a tier 5 out of 6. And you see here, I'm going to scroll down a bit. I don't know if this is in the OBS angle, is it? Yeah, it is. Okay. At the top performers, the MVP was Slowbro, the offensive MVP. You know what? I don't think that's accurate. I put that there after the Trick Room sweep, but after that finals game, I think Buzzwole took that crown. And then the defensive MVP, and we're back to Slowbro. Slowbro just had a colossal season for us. Buzzwole really had a good impact too, but nothing really did what Slowbro did for us there. He really carried the team. I'm going to go over our schedule here. I'm just making sure that's in the OBS. It's not, I'm going to have to scroll this over here. So we had 6-0 win week 1, and that was a game where Curum put in a lot of work. And then we had our 6-0 win here, which is where Steelix put in a ton of work. Next week we went and faced them and won only 4-0. And I believe it was Celesteela who had the biggest impact there. And then we had our one close game of the season here, which was a lot of fun. We had to land a Stone Edge, and fortunately we did. It was a great game, especially compared to the rest of the ones we had that season. And it was all about Buzzwole in that game. And yeah, you see this isn't complete. We did go into the playoffs early. It just was the most sensible move for the league with the way things were going. And our next game was a semi-final game, and of course that was all Slowbro. And we had the finals game where it was mostly Buzzwole. We saw some of Slowbro and Umbreon shining as well, but it was mostly Buzzwole. And overall, I'm going to scroll over here, we got 35 direct KOs, 1 passive, so 36 total KOs. I'm not sure if that survival... Yeah, that survival should be accurate, isn't it? I'm not sure. Who cares? And we had 8 deaths to our 36 KOs, so overall we did pretty damn good on this game. I'm proud of the outcome we had. Slowbro did real good for us, and Buzzwole did again, and who knows, you may see that dynamic duo in the league that'll be coming soon, so I look forward to that. And by might, I mean, yep, I definitely drafted both of them again, and you're going to get to see them both on a team again, and we'll see if they can replicate the success they had here. So, even though we didn't have the full season, I had quite a bit of fun in this league. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it, and that's going to be our recap. Thanks for watching. Have yourselves a good night.